Chapter 9, Jacksonian America. The Rise of Mass Politics. So, last time, Andrew Jackson was elected. Many people are happy with this, but some people are not. So, there's an expansion of the right to vote. In the western states, all white males can vote in the western states. In other states, they're reducing the requirement to vote, at least for men, white men. In Massachusetts, reformers complain that the rich are better represented than the poor. Conservatives say that the power should come from property. So there's the elimination of the property requirement in that state, but voters must be taxpayers. In Rhode Island, the conservative legislature blocked all reform efforts. So Thomas Dorr starts a new constitution, which is supported by the public, but is blocked by the legislature, but they create a new government alongside it anyways. So that's what's called the Dorr Rebellion, which was quelled by the old government, but the event pressured the old government to draft a new constitution which expanded suffrage for males, white males. So the number of voters increased more than the total population, so it's a more percentage of the population voting than ever before. There was a growing interest in politics. There was the new idea that parties were essential to democracy, whereas the founding fathers thought that parties were horrible and should be avoided at all costs. In New York, Martin Van Buren leads a dissident political faction against the dominant political leadership. He argued that only an institutionalized party based in the populace could ensure genuine democracy. So now there's a two-party system at the national level: Whigs, anti-Jackson, and Democrats, supporters of Jackson. Jackson's theory of democracy is that there's equality to all white male citizens, and subjugation of African Americans, Indians, and women. He thought that this was the only way to preserve white male democracy. Jackson believed that offices belonged to the people, not entrenched office holders. And this led to the spoils system, in which elected officials can appoint followers to public office. There was also the party convention, which nominates candidates for presidency. Power comes from the people rather than aristocratic institutions like the caucus. The idea was that the power came from the people rather than aristocratic. So, but none of this really transferred power to the people like they wanted it to. Our federal union. Jackson, in asserted supremacy of the union in face of a challenge. The South Carolinians blamed the tariff abominations for the stagnant economy, and they consider secession from the Union. So, Calhoun has this theory of nullification in which states can declare federal laws null and void if they consider them unconstitutional. So, Martin Van Buren is Jackson's Secretary of State. He held great influence with the president. So, what happened was, Peggy's affair, which was Peggy Eaton, she had a later marriage with the Secretary of War, Eaton. The cabinet wives refused to receive her. Calhoun was with the ones who didn't receive her, but Buren befriended them, so that made the president like him, basically. So Calhoun, if he had any idea of becoming president, it's gone now. This is a debate over the federal policy towards Western lands. Senate proposes closing land sales. So Robert Hayne argued that the South and West were victims of Eastern tyranny. They might join in defense against the East. Daniel Webster challenges Hayne to a debate, states' rights versus national power. Hayne defends nullification, but Webster wants to keep the U.S. united. Jackson sides with Webster, and Calhoun is with Hayne, valuing liberty more than union. South Carolina nullifies tariffs, and Andrew Jackson sees that as treason. So he enacts a force bill authorizing the president himself to forcibly enforce acts of Congress. So Henry Clay proposes a compromise. The tariff will be lowered gradually over time. Lowered gradually all over time. And then we deal with the Indians. The removal of the Indians. Jefferson's idea of the noble savage, he thought that Indians could be civilized once they were assimilated into white culture, but now there's a more hostile attitude toward the Indians, unlike in Jefferson's time. The whites want to remove the Indians so they could have the Indian Territory. The Indians attempt to create larger tribes to deal with whites, but they were weak and divided. The federal government claims they're responsible for the Indians, so we can just move them out of the way of white settlement. In some cases, the Indians did rebel, such as the Black Hawk War. The Sauk and Fox Indians attempt to reoccupy the land in Illinois. The white settlers repel them with vicious military efforts. So that didn't go so well. So we have the 5 civilized tribes in the South: the Cherokee, the Creek, the Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw. The Removal Act, in which the federal government negotiates treaties with the tribes to cede land. However, the Cherokees, they get mad, so they try to stop white encroachments by appealing to the Supreme Court. But they did not succeed. So, Cherokee removal, otherwise known as the Trail of Tears, forced the Indians to go to Indian Territory in modern-day Oklahoma, and many died, and that's why it's called the Trail of Tears. Other civilized tribes moved too, but the Seminoles resisted. Chief Osceola staged an uprising. Whites responded by killing off the Indians. So were there alternatives to removal? We could have assimilated. We could have peacefully lived with the Indians, but we didn't decide to do that. We decided, okay, you're leaving. Jackson and the Bank War. So, Jackson was opposed to the concentration of power and aristocratic privilege. Nicholas Biddle, who is the president of the bank, versus Jackson as the president. Nicholas Biddle favored soft money, which is banknotes. Banknotes are sufficient for currency, but Jackson believed that hard money is only sufficient money, which is money backed in gold and silver, or just gold and silver. On the soft money side, they believed in speculation and rapid economic growth, but Jackson was suspicious of speculation. So, Nicholas Biddle tries to renew the bank's charter, but Jackson vetoes it. Clay tries running for president to save the bank, but Jackson is re-elected. Jackson uses Taney to put government funds in state banks, which his enemies called pet banks. Biddle responds with calling in loans, etc. His policies cost him the charter renewal, so Jackson officially destroys the bank in 1836. Taney is appointed Chief Justice after Marshall's death. So there was the Charles River Bridge versus Warren Bridge court case, which is one company has a monopoly of the traffic, and one company wanted to create a new toll-free road. And the court ruled in favor of the new company and expansion of economic opportunity. The changing face of American politics. The Whig Party emerges in opposition to Jackson. The Democrats emphasize opportunity for white males and attack centers of corrupt privilege, whereas the Whigs favored expanding government and were fearful of Western expansion, support of banks, corporations, etc. However, both were more interested in winning elections than maintaining their values, so they'd do anything to get those votes, even if it went against their policies. The Whigs used the anti-Masonry movement to attack Democratic Jackson and Van Buren. And the Whigs, they couldn't settle on a single leader in their party, so they had the Great Triumvirate, which was Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and John Calhoun. In the election of 1836, it was Van Buren, a Democrat, versus several Whig candidates. The Whig candidates were not enough to win the presidency, and of course, Van Buren is elected. So, in the year before the election, there was an economic boom. There was a surplus in the Treasury. So there was a Distribution Act, wherein the federal government placed surplus to states. It also stimulates the economic boom further. And this is the speculative fever which Jackson does not trust. Jackson issues the specie circular requiring land payment to be gold or silver. This causes the Panic of 1837, in which Buren's administration did little to help. There was the creation of the independent Treasury, in which the government funds were in an independent Treasury, a government and bank divorce, so to speak. The Whigs nominate William Henry Harrison. The Democrats nominate Van Buren. The penny press carries news of candidates to many people. The Whigs were represented as a party of the common people, but the Democrats did that too. However, Harrison wins. But then he decides to stay too long in the cold, making his speech, so he dies of pneumonia a month after being elected to office. So Vice President Tyler takes over. So he calls himself a Whig, but he used to be a Democrat, and he has a lot of Democratic policies, basically. So the Whigs remove him from their party. He and some other Whigs rejoin the Democratic Party. Along with these domestic controversies, there was also a threat of Great Britain and the United States being close to war again. So the Canadians use an American ship to rebel. The British destroy the ship, and Americans get upset because it's our ship. There was Aroostook, the War of Aroostook, which was a violent brawl between the Canadians and Americans over disputed territory. The slaves on board an American ship mutinied, and the British declared them free from slavery. The Webster-Burton Treaty established a firm northern boundary between Canada and America. Anglo-American or British-American relations improved. Tyler also opens the first diplomatic relations with China, such as the Treaty of Wang Ya, I don't know how to say that, which allowed America to be a part of China's trade, and also extraterritoriality, the right of Americans to be tried by American and not Chinese officials. Next time, we will talk about America's Industrial Revolution and aspects of American culture during this time.